Guess what we're going to be doing with this video? Making a guessing game. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Creating a new ActionScript 3.0 document. I'm going to save it as, on my H drive, I'm going to call it my name, you should use yours, dash guessing game. To begin, we're going to need 3 layers. We need an actions layer, a text layer, and a buttons layer. Okay, actions will be on top, text will be in the middle, buttons will be on the bottom. And actually, they should just be button, not buttons. So then I'm going to lock the actions layer. I'm going to lock our text layer. And guess what's going on the button layer? A button. Oh no, dun dun dun. So I'm going to go to my rectangle tool, select it. I'm going to make sure the corners are rounded at 30. Then I'm going to use my paint bucket tool to make a, let's say, blue button. I like blue. You can use whatever color you want. So I'm just going to click and drag until I get something that looks kind of like the shape of a button. I'm going to use my selection tool to select it. I'm going to tap F8 to convert to a symbol. And the name will be blue. Actually, this is going to be submit button. So I'll just say submit button. The type will be a button, and the registration point will be in the middle. So once I click OK, now I have a button. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to align this to the center. So it says align to stage. I'm just going to align it to the horizontal center. And I do not care where it is on vertically. We just need it in the middle here. So left and right, centered in the middle. I'm going to double click on it to go into it. And you remember we have our up, over, down, and hit frames, okay? Up is when your button is in its up state. It's not hovering over, it's not being clicked on, it's just floating on its own. The mouse is far away from it, okay? I'm going to rename this layer base, okay? And on the over frame, I'm going to insert a keyframe. This will give us a copy of what was on our up frame, okay? Make sure you're on the over frame. Select your button. I'm going to click on my fill color. I'm going to go into the color wheel over here. And I'm just going to bump up the brightness a little bit. So that way when we hover over our button, it gets a little bit brighter. So once we have that, check from up and over. There we go. And on the down frame, well, we need to make a darker version. So I'm going to copy our up frame. So I'm going to right click on it, click copy frames, paste it on the down frame. Okay, so now on our down frame, we have a copy of what was on our up frame, and our over frame is a little lighter. So now on the down frame, I'm going to select our base. I'm going to click on the fill color. I'm going to go into our color wheel, and I'm going to turn this down so that it is darker than what was on our up frame. Okay. So now we have up, over, down. And remember, our hit frame is just the area where we can click on, so we can leave this as a plain, we can just extend out our down frame. We don't have to do anything fancy for the it or the hit. So remember, up is when our mouse is not touching our button. Over is when our mouse is hovering over our button. And down is when we've actually clicked down on our button. So let's test this so far and just run. And then we should have up, over, down. Okay, so double click on our button, go back into it. We're going to add another gloss layer because you like gloss so much. So make a new layer, call it gloss. Okay, I'm just going to copy whatever is in our base. So I'm going to take the up frame, I'm going to copy it and paste it onto our up frame of the gloss. And now we have, if we hide our base, we have on our gloss layer basically an exact copy of what we had before, except that it's on the gloss layer on the up frame and extends all the way out into the hit frame. Okay, we don't need it extending into the hit frame because hit is covered by our base. So let's remove it from, we'll just right click on the hit frame for gloss, click remove frames. And now we have our gloss on our up, over, and down frame, except that there is, well, it's not a gloss yet. We haven't done anything. So let's go unhide our base so that way we can see kind of what we're working with later. I'm going to use the sub selection tool. Click on the up frame of our gloss layer. going to select these bottom points here. I'm going to delete them, and you can see we have the outline of our shape here. And I'm going to turn this this color that we have on our gloss to something that's transparent. So I'm going to use the white to black for now. I'm going to go to my paint bucket tool. Now I'm just going to click where my gloss was, and there we go. We have something that's starting to look like a gloss. So now if I use the gradient transform tool, I can click on the button. I'm going to go up to our color palette, and I'm going to change, instead of black, I want this to be white. And then I'm going to click on it one more time. Instead of 100% alpha, we want it to have 0% alpha. So now we have a fade from 100% visible white to 0% visible white, okay? So the last part is just to take this little circle here, when we get these rotating arrows here, and we're going to rotate this around so that it's going from top to bottom. You might have to hold shift to get this to snap so that it goes perfectly up and down. And now we have a gloss that fades from white to transparent white. And if you remember from our other video, I like to add curves to our gloss. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go into my pen tool, click on add anchor point. I'm just going to click somewhere in the center here so that we add an extra point. I'm going to use my sub selection tool, make sure it's selected, this one point here, it should turn purple. I'm going to tap down on my arrow key a couple times to bring it down. And then I'm going to go into my convert anchor point tool. I'm going to click on that point, and I'm going to drag it out to the sides, and I'm just going to hold shift so that it ends up snapping so it's perfectly horizontal. If you go the wrong way, your gloss will curve over and not work correctly, okay? So you have to drag it to the right, hold down shift, and now we have a nice curved gloss, okay? So we have all of our frames there, and it's starting to look pretty good. The very last part is just to add some text to the top. So I'm going to make a layer called text, okay? I'm going to lock my gloss layer, and on our text layer, all we're going to do is set our color first to white. I'm going to make sure it's 100% alpha, okay, which it is. And I'm going to go into our text tool. I am going to use, let's say, I'm just going to use typewriter for now. I'm going to make sure it is set to static text. And I'm going to click, and I'm going to type in submit, the word submit, okay? So now the very last thing I have to do is just align this to the center. So I'm going to go to our align tools. And remember, align to stage will align it to the center of our button because we're inside of our button. So that's this little crosshair right here. So we can leave align to stage checked. And I'm just going to click align horizontal center. I'm going to click align vertical center. So that way I know it's in the middle. So once that's done, we don't need our text on the hit frame. So I'm just going to right click and click remove frames. And now we have a button that has the word submit on it. And it changes colors depending on how you're interacting with it. So I just saved right there. I'm going to run it. And now we have a button where we can click on it and it looks nice and pretty. So now the last thing we have to do with our button is give it an instance name. So I'm going to click on it in my selection tool, and in the top right, I'm going to call it BTN, which is just short for button, and type in the word submit. Name yours exactly how you see mine there. Okay, I'm going to press enter, and now we can move on. So I'm going to unlock my text layer and lock my buttons layer, and I'm going to go over into my text tool. I'm going to make sure my stroke is no stroke and that my color is black. I'm going to make sure it is dynamic text. I'm going to use the font typewriter. If you don't use one of these top 3 fonts, remember you need to embed your fonts, okay? And I'm going to make sure the behavior is multi-line. Once I have that all set, I'm just going to click, and I'm going to type in the words feedback text. And as you can see, it doesn't all fit, so I'm going to make it nice and big. So we're going to put some other stuff in here too. And if I go back to my selection tool, click away from it, it should be surrounded in a dotted line, which indicates that it is dynamic text. So I'm going to center this using my align tool. So I'll align it horizontal to the horizontal center. and we are going to give this the name of TXT, which will be short for text field, and we're going to say feedback. This is where, when we guess, the program will tell us whether we are wrong or right. Okay? So the next part we need is we need a couple more sets of text. Okay? So we're going to have another instance of dynamic text. Okay? I'm going to click about right here, and I'm just going to type guess number 1 for now, and I'm still using typewriter. And if I move this over just so that it doesn't go on to the next line, there we go. This will give us feedback on how many times the player has taken a guess. So we're going to name this TXT guess number. Click OK. Go back to our text tool. We are going to need click away from it. Go back to our text tool. We're going to need some input text. So I'm going to change the type to input text. We can leave it the same, typewriter, and all that jazz. We're just going to create a text box right here, and we're not going to put anything in it. This is where our user is going to enter in their guess. Okay, so if you have it set to input, again, should have a dashed line around it. We're actually going to select it with our selection tool, and we're going to give it a border. So there's an option that says show border around text. Because we don't do this, it's not going to show up when we run. So let me show you. If I run, we don't give it a border, it's just going to be empty. So we can actually input stuff here, but you can't see that it's there. You don't know it's there, right? So click on it in your selection tool. Click this button here called show border around text. And now we have a nice little option for the user to enter their input in. And the very last text field we're going to need is going to be a static text field. And make sure you don't have anything selected when you go to changes, because if you have something already selected and you go to change the type of text, then it'll mess it up. But oh, one other thing I forgot. Click on your input text. We need to give it a name, an instance name. So I'm going to name it TXT input. Okay. So once that's done, click away from it so I have nothing selected. I'm going to go into my text tool. I'm going to use, not there. We're going to change this to static text. So I'm going to use typewriter. Actually, I'm just going to show you how you'd embed a font. Okay. So let's say I wanted to embed typewriter. Click embed. I've showed you this a bunch of times. I'm not even going to change the name. I'm just going to say character range is all and click OK. And now, no matter what, I'll be good. So I'm going to type in something to describe what this game is all about. So I just clicked once. I say, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10. And I'll fix how big this is in just a second. You have 3 tries to guess the number. Okay, so it's too big, so I'm just going to use my selection tool, select this, go under my properties, and I'm going to change it to, let's say, size 20. Now it fits. So I'm going to select it one more time, go to my align tool, align it horizontally. So now everything should be relatively centered on our stage. This right here, these two aren't quite centered, so I'm going to move them over just a little bit till it looks about centered. I'm going to drag all this stuff. Oops, I'm going to unlock the button layer for just a second. And I'm going to drag all this stuff down just so I have some more space. Relock my button layer. And now I'm going to save. So what we have is just a static text field that's saying, hey, this is what we're going to be doing when we try guessing the number. This dynamic text field will show us how many, what guess the user is at, or the player. So they're going to have, once they guess once, it'll change to guess 2. Once they guess 3 times, it'll change to guess 3. Feedback text will tell them whether or not they guessed correctly, and then submit will actually submit their guess. Okay, so let's just run this and make sure everything works for now or is in place. So we have this, we have a guess, and I'm going to say, whatever I want to type in, that works. Feedback text, nothing should happen there just yet, and we click, and our button actually is clickable. So now we can actually start the coding portion of this. I'm going to lock our text layer, and I'm going to click on our actions frame and tap F9 so that we can start coding. First thing I'm going to do is, we need to create a variable, or actually it could be a constant. We're going to create a constant that'll represent the maximum amount of guesses that our users allowed to have. So I said they will have 3 guesses, so I'm going to make a constant called max guesses. I'm going to make it an integer, and I'm going to set it equal to 3. Okay? And then we need to keep track of what guess our user is on. So I'm going to create a variable called guessNum, which will just be short for guess number. Set it type integer, and set it equal to 1, because their first guess is going to be guess number 1, right? So let's actually create a variable that'll hold the value of the number they're trying to guess. So I'm going to say var number, say it's an integer, set it equal to, see, we're going to do some rounding here. So I'm going to say math.floor, we need a number between we need a number between 1 and 10, right? So math.floor, I'm going to do math.random times 10. So give us a number between 0 and 9. And we're just going to add 1 so that we get a number between 1 and 10. Number between 1 and 10. Oops, let me actually spell out 10. So I just put a comment there. Let's put some more comments. So number of guesses the user gets. The guess the user is currently on. Okay. So now I'm going to save that, and I could run this, but it's not really going to do anything any different. Let's go on to the next part. So right now, when we run this program, our input text lets us put in any value we want. Well, we only want the users to be able to enter in numbers, okay? There is a special property for text fields, and I'll pull that up right now in the API. That property is called restrict. See, it indicates the set of characters that a user can enter into the text field. When you have a string, each letter or number inside of it is a character, okay? So if I click on restrict, it'll bring me down to some examples, and it's showing me how I can get this to actually work. So here it's saying we can allow uppercase characters, spaces, and numbers, and this can be a little tricky when you're trying to use all these special combinations. We can actually just type in what letters we want and what numbers we want the user to be able to enter. Okay, so I'm going to go back into my code, and all I'm going to do is we want to limit our input text, right? So we call this txt input, and to access it .restrict, say equals, and then double quotes. We just need to type in everything we want them to be able to type in. So I want them to be able to type 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay? So end with a double quote and end the line with a semicolon. Let's put a comment. Restrict input to numbers only. Okay? So now if we run, and we try typing in our text field, our input text, I can type all the letters I want and nothing shows up. But if I type numbers, numbers come up. So that's good. So what's the next part? The next part is we want to make sure our input text has nothing in it when we start. So I'm going to say txt input dot text equals just an empty pair of double quotes. Clear out input text. Okay. So what's the next thing we need to do? Well, we want our user to be able to click, right, and submit their input. So let's add the event listener for our click, or our button. Click on our button. So what did we call our button? We called our button btn submit, and we're going to put dot add event listener say mouse events dot click is what we're going to listen for. And we're going to call this submit input. Okay. So now that we created our event listener and we're telling it to look for the function submit input, we actually have to create that function. So I'm going to say function submit input. Oops, input. Make sure I spell it right. And we're going to pass it in a mouse event. And remember, don't worry about this at the top here if it pops up. And the type is going to be void. We're not returning anything. If you notice that sometimes I type only half a word and it just magically pops up, well, if this suggestion panel is correct, you can just tap tab and it'll fill it out for you. Okay? So next part is a pair of curly brackets. Let's make sure this works. So I'm going to trace out click every time we click on our button. So if I run this and I click, it says click, 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 then we are good. Awesome. So back to our actions window. Let's comment this out. Let's put some more comments. So add click listener to button. Okay, and well, what else do we need to check? So once our user has submitted the input, we want to see if they actually entered input. Okay, so what we're going to do is say if txt input dot text dot length is greater than 0, we want to do some stuff. Okay, and let me better explain this. Okay, whenever you have a string, or in this case text inside of a text field, it has a property called length. Length will tell you how many words and numbers or whatever it is made up of. So if I put the word cat, the length would be 3. Okay, if I put the letter A, the length would be 1. If I put A and B, the length would be 2. Okay, so we're going to check to make sure that the user actually input something. Okay, so if they don't input something, well, let's actually use our feedback text. Remember, so we're going to say txt feedback dot text equals you didn't enter a guess yet. Okay, so if they entered some text, well, right now we're not going to do anything, but if they didn't enter any text, we want to say you didn't enter a guess yet. So let's run this. And once we click submit, it says you didn't enter a guess yet. And if we do enter, it's not going to change because, well, it already says that now and it wouldn't change. Anyway, so we're making progress, What else do we need to do? Well, if you noticed when we ran txt feedback, that feedback text still said feedback text in the beginning, right? Or when we ran, we don't want it to say feedback text. If there's no feedback, we want it to start off as an empty text field. So let's do that. So let's go right underneath where we cleared out our input text and say txt feedback dot text equals 2 empty double quotes. Okay, and we're just going to put a comment saying clear out feedback text. Okay, so now if we run, feedback text should have nothing in it. If we enter a value, nothing should happen when we click submit. But if there is no value, it should say you didn't enter a guess yet. Great, moving on. So if they did enter a guess, right? If they did enter a guess, we want to check that guess, right? We want to see if their guess was equal to our number, right? So let's say if input text dot text, right? So whatever they input is equal to the number. And remember, we need to convert this to a string so we can make this comparison, right? Because our input text is returning a string. So I'm going to use string. This is how we convert. We just use whatever type we're trying to convert to and then open close parentheses. Okay, whatever value you're trying to convert goes inside. So I'll just say number, because remember we generated a random number up here. So if our text equals our string, or equals our number when we turn it into a string, then what do we want to do? We want to say, for now, let's just trace out. Actually, you know what? We already have feedback text, so let's say txt feedback dot text equals, you got it, the number was, what was the number? Well, we just add on the value of whatever our number is. Number was, well, whatever that number was. There we go. So now, if they get correct, if they guessed correctly, so if they guessed correctly, then we want to say you got it and tell them what the number was, okay? So let's run this. Oops. Oh, my bad. I put input text here. This should be txt input. I spelled that wrong. Sorry. Save and run. So now if I guess, don't put anything, it says you didn't enter a guess yet. I put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, there we go. The number was 5. Okay. If I put anything else in, nothing's going to happen unless I leave it blank because we haven't handled that yet. Okay. So if the user guessed correctly, we want to say they got it, tell them what the number was. But if the user did not guess correctly, so we're going to put an else attached to this if statement, then we want to say they didn't get it, right? So we're going to say that oops, not a comment. We're going to say txt feedback.text equals, we're going to tell them not whatever number they guessed. So we're going to say not plus input text.text plus, oops, 1. Or sorry, not plus 1, plus exclamation point. Just because we want to be excited. And once again, I keep putting input text. It's txt input. Okay? So now if we run, if they get it wrong, it'll tell them it's not whatever they guessed with that happy little exclamation point here. Okay? So if I say 1, it's not 1. 2, not 2. 3, not 3. 4, not 4. 5, not 5. 6, not 6. 7. Oh, it was 7. Okay, and I can go on 8, 9, 10. Oops, not 19. 10. 8, okay. Okay, so there's a little bit of a problem. You can put an enter here. You can put a new line. Let's fix that up real quick. Okay, it wasn't 1910, obviously though. Okay, so let's go onto our timeline. Let's unlock our text layer for just a second. Click on this input text here and change the behavior to single line. So that way they can't put in any new line, okay? So I'm gonna save, lock our text layer, go back into our actions frame and tap F9. So now we're telling them that they did not guess correctly, but now we also want to increase the number. We're not incrementing how many guesses they've had. We're not keeping track of it. We said we're going to give them 3 guesses, but right now we give them as many as they want, right? So what we need to do is that if the user did not guess correctly, we need to add 1 to guesses, okay? 1 to guesses, and we're just going to say, well, what did we name that variable? We named it guess number, or guess num, so I'm just going to copy it from up here. Go back down, add 1 to guesses. I'm going to say guess plus plus. Remember, that's the same as guess num. So I'm going to say guess num plus num plus. Oh man, I can't speak. I'm going to say guess num plus plus. And remember that that is the same as guess num plus equals 1. So we're just adding on 1 to it, okay? So now, if they don't guess correctly, we're going to add 1 to guess num, right? And let's actually update the text field for our guesses, right? Because the next time around, they're going to have a different guess to try. So we named that text field txt guess number. Let's say that dot text equals what we want it to say, just like we had it originally. You want to say guess number, right? And then you just want to say what the actual guess number they're on is, right? So So guess num, and then let's put a colon so it looks nice and pretty. Okay. So now if we run, if they guess it wrong, it should add on to their guesses. Okay. So right now it says guess 1 because that's what we set it to start. If I guess a number, it says not 2. Now it says guess number 2. If I guess it again, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that should pretty much go up until, well, until they guess it right. Right. So let's keep going until we get 9. Okay. Cool. So it took 20 guesses to get 9, but we only want to give them 3 chances to guess this number, right? So how do we do that? Well, we need to check to see if the guess that they're on is greater than the max number of guesses we've allowed. Okay, so if we go back into our actions, we need to go right below where we add 1 to guesses. Okay, we're going to check to see if guess num is greater than max guesses. Well, if they've run out of guesses, if they end up getting to guess 4, we don't want to give them a guess 4. We just want to say, sorry, you lost. Okay, so we're going to say txt feedback.text equals sorry, oops, not spory, sorry, you lost. The answer was, what was the answer? It was whatever number was, okay? And a semicolon. So if they have run out of guesses, if they ran out of guesses, we're going to do that. Else what do we want to do? We want to tell them that they just got it wrong. Okay, so we're going to take this right here, press Control X to cut it. I'm going to get rid of these extra lines here, and I'm going to put this right here. So Control V to paste, and I'm going to press Tab to tab that out nice and pretty. So now if they run out of guesses, it should say, sorry, you lost. The answer was whatever the answer was. Okay, so now if we run, we get, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10. Say 1, not 1, 3, not 3, and this is my last guess, so if I say 2, sorry, you lost. The answer was 7. So now I lost the game. Okay, so that's pretty much it. The only thing you might want to add on is every time they guess that they clear out your input text. If you noticed, whenever I entered a guess, my text field still had the old number in it, and I had to delete it. So I could go under Actions, and we want to do this after we check whether or not they entered a guess. So after this if statement, so here's the opening bracket, here's the matching curly bracket. We know this because they're lined up nice and pretty. And after the else, we want to say txt input equals this right here. Okay, so that way we clear it out. And now every time, oops, remember you got to put the dot text at the end. I forgot that. So we run. Now we get, if I guess, let's say 1, submit, it says not 1, and it cleared it out here. So if I say 2, it says not 2. If I say 3, it says sorry, you lost. The answer was 8. And that's about it right now. You could possibly get this to all reset. We're not going to handle that with this video. I just wanted to give you a basic example with some nested if statements that ends up showing how we can submit user input to get a guessing game.